DJI clearly felt that there was more life to the Mavic 3 and took to the skies again by expanding it, introducing the more affordable Mavic 3 Classic, which just has the one main lens, dropping the telephoto lens, but even more recently the 3 Pro, which we're reviewing today. Now, maybe unsurprisingly, at its core, not much has changed here, but that's not a bad thing. The 3 Pro uses the same impressive 4/3 Hasselblad CMOS 24mm equivalent main camera and the 1/2-inch CMOS 166 equivalent telephoto lens, which we found again on that original 2021 Mavic 3. And while that already was a great combo and for some probably considered pro enough, it did have its limitations. So this year the 3 Pro ups the game by introducing a 70mm equivalent medium telephoto 1/1.3-inch CMOS sensor, which DJI believes will bridge what some users on the previous 2-year-old model considered to be a gap between its main wide-angle lens and that super telephoto. The Mavic 3 Pro stands out as the first drone in DJI's lineup, in fact in any other consumer drone, to feature a 3-camera system, which for some, with that new lens, might be enough to justify its new Pro name. Just as with other DJI drones, there are several bundles that you can choose from for the Mavic 3 Pro. For its most basic package, the DJI Mavic 3 Pro comes with a DJI RC controller, and that comes in at $2,200. For $3,889, you can upgrade to the DJI RC Pro controller with the same Fly More combo accessories. But if money is no object, you can then upgrade to the DJI Mavic 3 Pro Cine Premium combo, which goes for a jaw-dropping $47.99. Doing some quick math there, and that's almost double the price of the basic 3 Pro. This will unlock features such as 1TB of onboard SSD storage, a 10 gigabit per second light speed data cable, and support for Apple ProRes recording. And of course, for certain professional users who require these capabilities, this might be worth it, but it is certainly a substantial premium to pay to unlock those perks. For our review, we're testing the Fly More combo, which comes with the DJI RC Pro controller. This combo comes with 2 extra batteries, a charging hub, an ND filter set, and a carrying bag. You'll also find the usual spare props, thumbsticks, as well as a few other accessories. And for a lot of users, it's an incredible package, especially if you just want everything without having to worry about any replacement parts. But we have to admit, for some users, it might not be the best choice. For one, I've never really been a big fan of DJI's included bundled shoulder bags, and this one is no different. Fitting all your accessories in, especially that 100-watt charger, is a very tight fit. And in truth, I really prefer packing the drone in my other camera bag, especially if I'm on a bigger shoot and I require more of my gear to take along. Hands-on with the Pro controller, and we had some mixed thoughts. We did compare it to our more affordable RC controller, which came with our Mavic 3 Mini Pro. First, its screen has a higher brightness, which can make it a little bit easier to view outdoors, especially in direct sunlight. It also has 32 gigabytes of built-in storage, which will allow you to conveniently store your files or your screen recordings internally without needing a micro SD card. But more importantly, especially for bigger productions, it has HDMI out for direct monitoring. Beyond this, it also has fold-out antennas, which could potentially give you more reliable connectivity, though we weren't able to test this. The important thing to consider though is that this Pro controller comes in at a significantly higher price tag, not to mention it's also almost twice as heavy. So for some users, even though they might find the added features and enhanced performance worth the cost, for the majority of users like myself, they'll probably be more than satisfied with the cheaper RC controller, especially if you're upgrading from previous generations of drones which needed to use your phone as its display. Again, as the Mavic 3 Pro is not a brand new series, it's going to look pretty much identical to the other Mavic 3s, but on its front it does feature a redesigned larger gimbal module to accommodate the enhanced camera system. It has the 4/3 Hasselblad CMOS sensor at the bottom still, while its other 2 cameras sit above side by side. And given that we do have an additional camera and a larger gimbal, the Mavic 3 Pro weighs a little bit more at 958 grams compared to the Mavic 3, which was just 895 grams. It's also a little bit larger when folded and unfolded, though it's not too noticeable. The thing is though, even though that weight increase of just 69 grams may not seem like a lot at first, it is worth noting that in certain countries, that slight difference can have specific implications. For example, in Europe, the Mavic 3 Pro's weight surpasses the threshold for classification as a C1 class drone. And so that means if you are trying to fly the drone in one of those countries, you might need a higher tier pilot license, which for some might be a deal breaker. Now, probably the most important thing for a lot of people getting these drones are the shooting modes, so let's talk about those. Just as with the other Mavic 3 models, the Hasselblad wide-angle camera serves as the primary camera on the Mavic 3 Pro. It can record in up to 5.1K at 50 frames per second, and at 4K a very impressive 120 frames per second, which is the same as my Sony a7S III. It has an effective resolution of 20 megapixels and a variable aperture from f2.8 to f11. Its supported color modes include normal, D-Log, HLG, D-Log-M, and even a night video mode, which allows for stunning footage even in low light conditions, though it's going to come at the expense of shooting in manual. The new medium telecamera has an aperture of f2.8 and offers an effective resolution of either 48 megapixels or 12 megapixels. It can shoot up to 4K 60 frames per second. The telecamera remains unchanged and has that same equivalent lens of 166mm and an aperture of f3.4. Just as with the medium telephoto lens, it can record up to 4K 60 frames per second, and it has an optical zoom of 7 times, but it can digitally zoom up to 28 times. When we first began our test, we approached this new 3-camera setup of the Mavic 3 Pro with some skepticism. We questioned its practicality and wondered who really needs to have 3 cameras on their drone. However, for the most part, our doubts quickly dissipated as we began exploring the possibilities offered by that trio of focal lengths. Switching between 24mm to 70mm to 166, we discovered how well balanced the system could be, as well as ways that it helped us capture unique perspectives, parallax shots, and more immersive exploration of our surroundings. Almost immediately, we appreciated the ability to swiftly switch between the lenses to capture more engaging shots and convey a more complete story. The thing is, instead of having to rely solely on flying closer or further away from your subject as you normally would, with a simple tap you can switch between the 3 lenses. This not only saves you time, but maximizes how much battery life you get out of each flight. And DJI makes it very simple. Just as with your camera's phone app, you can toggle between its 1x, 3x, and 7x zoom levels. And although you won't necessarily be using this while filming, you can now pinch to zoom on screen to enjoy a relatively seamless way of digitally zooming up to 28 times. This gives you the ability to get close up and personal with your subjects, but without actually needing to physically be right there. Now, beyond the fact that this gives you a very digital zoom look when you're punched in at 28 times, you're also limited to just its regular color profile. Again, this isn't intended for professional work, but it's a very fun way to explore your surroundings. But beyond this, another perfect example of how you can use this mode is for inspections, where the ultimate video clarity isn't the most crucial thing, but instead it's about getting closer to your subject without taking up that much time, or perhaps it's just too dangerous. Now, earlier I did mention how quick and easy it is to switch between your 3 lenses, but it is worth noting that there is a slight delay in the video feed when you are doing that switch. It's minor, but I found it was enough to warrant slowing down and even stopping what I was doing, especially when I was flying at lower altitudes or when I was closer to obstacles. Tied in with this, especially if you haven't experienced using the zoom lenses offered on this drone before, its 166mm and its new 70mm are punched in enough to make it difficult to really understand the relative surroundings of the drone, especially if you're just viewing it from its live feed as opposed to line of sight. And so that meant anytime I needed to tightly maneuver, unless I had that perfect line of sight, I opted to stick to its main 24mm lens to quickly move around. Now, as its main new selling feature, let's take a quicker look at that new 70mm lens. It's not really until you take off and fly around for a bit that you realize how useful this new medium telecamera can be. In fact, we were pretty surprised by how frequently we opted for that 70mm lens instead of that 166mm. In several examples, especially when the gimbal was pointed at more of a 90 degrees downward angle, the super tele lens often felt overly zoomed in for our needs. So whether I was following a car, tracking myself, or on a road bike, or just doing real estate photography, it's far more difficult to keep your entire subject in frame, especially with max flight altitude restrictions. And so in many ways, just as it was intended, that 70mm proved to be a great medium between the 2 other lenses. With every other drone that I've previously reviewed, I've always wished that I could have that extra reach to get close up enough on my subject while still keeping them in frame as I tracked its movement. Again, as great as that super telephoto can be, especially for subjects in the far distance, think like mountains, buildings, or even a boat out on the sea, in reality, when it comes to filming things that aren't really that far out in the distance, especially for a lot of things that I'm hired to do, it's in many ways far less practical. So when it comes to battery life, the Mavic 3 Pro's additional weight will slightly reduce its max flight time compared to the standard Mavic 3's 46 minutes. Instead, with the 3 Pro, its max flight time drops to about 43 minutes. Realistically though, for me at least, when factoring in taking off, getting to the destination that I want to film at, and of course factoring in getting back home and landing, I would usually get about 35 to maybe even 38 minutes of usable time in the air with moderate wind. Of course, if you require more flight time, you can buy more batteries, but that's going to set you back $209 each. Even with many of my paid gigs, whether it's weddings or real estate photography, I usually find 2 batteries to be enough. When it actually comes to using these 3 cameras, you're going to quickly notice something interesting. They're not all equal in terms of their sensor size, as well as their available picture profiles, as well as even their overall picture quality. For a lot of users, especially if clarity and low light quality are of top importance, the 24mm is still going to be the best option. The 166 is incredible for its range, though when you pixel peep, you'll start to notice it's a little bit softer and it doesn't have as great of dynamic range. But arguably, its biggest limitation is that it can only record in DJI's standard color profile. For me and a lot of other users, that's a major letdown. The new 70mm was noticeably more sharp in its videos and photos compared to the 166mm, but an important distinction between that and the 166mm is that this supports a flat picture profile, which will make it a lot easier to mix and match your footage to the 24mm, especially if you're shooting in that same flat picture profile. Without a doubt, DJI offers some of the best tracking features of any drone brand out there. The Mavic 3 Pro is no exception, that is, if you're only using its 24mm lens. Either using the 70mm or the 166mm, and you might be disappointed because it will not actually fly and follow your subject. My best guess for this omission is that it becomes increasingly difficult for the drone to lock onto the subject, especially when it's so zoomed in and has very little space in terms of framing to accommodate for that fast or unpredictable movement without the drone getting lost. And although you could, and I did manage to do it while manually flying the drone, just as with a regular telephoto lens on your DSLR camera, it will take a lot of practice to keep your subjects in frame. And so instead, with the new 70mm and the old 166mm lens, I think these are really still intended for slower moving or static subjects. The Mavic 3 Pro continues on DJI's reputation for delivering reliable, easy to fly, and long-lasting drones that give you incredibly fun yet practical aerial experiences. With the addition of that new 70mm lens, which again we are very surprised by how much we used it, the 3 Pro now offers a very well-rounded camera system that complements the other 2 lenses quite well. Now, drawing parallel to the Mavic 3 Classic, which only just came out a few months ago, and only features the 24mm lens, giving you a more budget-friendly option, I think it would be very interesting to see a Mavic 3 variant that drops the 166mm lens altogether. Perhaps this could be a somewhat more affordable option for those who want the 24mm and a 70mm but don't want to spend the money to get the 3 lenses altogether. So that's been our experience using the Mavic 3 Pro. Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. Is this a drone that you would use, and if so, why? This has been Paul with MakeUseOf.com. If you have any questions, you can let us know down there too. But until the next one, we'll catch you later.